Are you a woman in the corporate world striving to break barriers, challenge unconscious bias, and lead the way for women in leadership roles globally? If so, this is the podcast for you. Introducing Leading Ladies Who Lunch. The lunch hour is usually the time when colleagues get together for real, honest conversations about work, life, and everything in between. In each episode of Leading Ladies Who Lunch, we'll delve into insightful discussions and share actionable strategies to help you navigate corporate life. Co-hosted by me, Cicy George, a leadership development architect and inspirational speaker. I'm thrilled to share my experience and expertise on leadership, mentorship, and organizational intelligence to help you own your career.
And me, Rachel Lowndes, CEO and founder, imposter syndrome expert, and mindset coach at Rachel Lowndes Coaching and Consulting. Passionate about helping women conquer imposter syndrome and unleash their inner confidence to get the recognition and promotions they deserve.
Jam-packed with insightful conversations, expert advice, and inspiring stories from a diverse group, we'll explore how to overcome obstacles, shatter those glass ceilings, and build unshakable mindsets to unlock your true potential. So whether you're sipping a coffee or enjoying a meal at your desk, tune in for a no-host bar lunchtime chat. Episodes will be dropped every 2 weeks. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, one conversation at a time.
Welcome back to the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. Hey, beautiful. What's been up with you, Rachel?
Oh, hey, Cicy, how are you? It's been super cold here, as you know. I think I've said that the last few times. And I know that people don't think Australia gets cold, but it does, I assure you. But luckily, I'm about to fly out to the UK for 5 weeks, so hopefully it's a bit warmer there. And it's the Olympics! I'm not mad into the Olympics, but I do like a few of the events.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited. And I remember how cold Australia can get. We were there almost a decade ago, and we happened to be traveling in the month of August, and it was so cold. It was actually unseasonably cold that particular month, of course, and we had to go buy new winter coats for us and the kids. So I definitely can understand the cold.
Freezing here. August is one of the coldest months.
Oh, is it really? Oh, that I didn't know. I definitely was not prepared. The next time I go, I will be prepared. So now that I have my insider connections.
Yeah.
It's been really busy on this end. You know, my son graduated. We had a party for him, lots of festivities, and we're trying to make some travel plans to go see my brother on the other side of the country. So before you know it, summer is pretty much over for us. But it's really interesting. I mean, I feel like summer also is a time to kind of ramp up in certain parts of my life, especially for work. I thought of you. I did this workshop on feedback, and the workshop was for people leaders who have like teams and direct reports. And in designing the workshop, I literally, with everything I was crafting, I was pinpointing to certain memories of, oh yeah, remember that? Oh yeah, remember that one? And it was like all this like experience and knowledge and lessons came flooding over me. It was great. You know, and you know, the thing with feedback is you've got the positive experience and the negative experience. I know in the feedback scenarios I've experienced or the conversations I've had that were positive, I often took that feedback to heart and I made changes I needed to make because the leader was positive and supportive. But then I thought about the times when the conversations went awry and the leader was the opposite of that. The conversation was uncomfortable, it was awkward, and really just left me feeling deflated and definitely didn't motivate me to do anything with the feedback they were giving me. So when you think of feedback, what comes top of mind for you?
Oh, good question. I mean, I think as humans, we have a bit of an affinity to only remember the negative moments, you know, when that happens to us, because they do tend to stand out more. As if someone says, oh, can I give you some feedback? Your immediate is like, no, what's it going to be? I try to be a bit more open to that now, but you know, you've kind of got to remember that a lot of people do struggle to receive feedback. I certainly have always struggled to receive positive feedback as well, like mainly because, you know, my upbringing wasn't fueled that way. Like I was subjected to a lot of criticism and negative feedback as a child. I don't know whether that's because my parents are boomers and that's kind of the way that boomers give feedback on, you know, more critical way. So I have always struggled to believe any positive feedback, because if I did get positive feedback, it was nearly always matched with some negative feedback. And so it's like, I can't trust that positive feedback. So, you know, it's been a bit of a mix of positive and negative, but the biggest impact has been the negative feedback, which is why, you know, probably imposter syndrome has been such a dominant aspect of my life and career.
Oh, yes, I can totally relate. And you know what? I'm guessing a lot of our listeners can relate as well. You know, just as you said, I also had a similar experience with feedback because it came in the form of judgment or criticism. And
Mhm.
especially when I remember the earlier years of my professional career, when I knew a feedback conversation was coming, I was, terrified. What did I do now? Am I going to get reprimanded? It
Yeah.
felt like I was going to the principal's office to be scolded, like you were in school. And I think it's a very common gut response because the nature of feedback, it suggests that something is wrong and that we have to be fixed, which just goes against our natural desires as human beings to feel like we belong
Mhm.
just the way we are. And if you're only used to getting feedback that is negative in nature or meant to correct something, then yes, it's definitely a cause for imposter syndrome to play a big role.
I mean, yeah, I totally feel that kind of what have I done wrong moment, you know,
Right.
like um, I do remember in one of my jobs, like the CFO, I think I've said this before, but like if the CFO ever came over to talk to me and say, "Oh, Rachel,
Mhm.
can I talk to you?" I'd be like, "Oh God, what have I done now?" You know, it's like immediate panic, which is
Yes.
not a good way to be. Like, but you know, I've
No.
worked really hard on overcoming some of those fears. But yeah, as I say, when it comes to feedback time, there is a small element of my thinking that immediately goes, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Frantically
Dun,
running
dun, dun.
through my mind, trying to search out what it could be, then start looking for ways to,
Right.
like, you know, get out of receiving that altogether, you know, getting out of receiving it, like, oh, I'm not feeling well, you know, something like this, some sort of excuse will come up, and then or completely shutting down, which isn't a good way to receive feedback because you're not hearing it, you know, but it's definitely something that I've worked on over the last few years for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And I've also had to work on reframing, just to add on to what you're saying, reframing how I approach receiving
Mm.
and giving feedback.
Hmm.
Because, we all know delivering effective feedback is foundational skill for any leader. I mean,
Hmm.
if you were to Google top skills of leaders today,
Yeah,
feedback is on almost every single list.
yeah,
So
it's
that's
good
why
for
in
that.
today's episode, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the giving and the receiving end of feedback, why it's important to give feedback, and how you can deliver the message so that it's actionable and motivating. So, Rachel, let's dish out some of the juiciest of feedback moments. What comes to mind when you've been in a feedback conversation, either on the giving or receiving end?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was never in a position in my career to really be the giver of feedback necessarily, and you know, therefore, I was terrible at it. You know, I'm happy to admit that. You know, I kind of looking back on my career and going, oh, why did I have so many issues? And this is why. But like,
Maturity.
yeah,
You've been
yeah,
maturing.
I'm a very direct person, right? So I don't really hold back on what I think. And anyone who knows me and has worked with me does know that. But that doesn't mean I'm an unkind person. It just means I'm direct.
Right.
Um, so lots of people don't like that, right? They just don't like that. And so I had to learn to be more empathetic and understanding of where people are at and how to be helpful over what can come across as critical sometimes. Because again, you know, people don't always receive feedback very well. Um,
Mhm.
And, you know, criticism is how I learned to receive feedback from my parents. So this is how I assumed you also gave it out, because we only know what we know, right? So that's our kind of
Exactly.
our own story. But obviously that didn't work very well in the workplace. But as a coach, I approach these conversations where feedback may be relevant or helpful with curiosity now, as well as calling people out on their BS with kindness at the heart of everything I do. You know, this is really important as a coach as well, because you don't, no one needs a coach to be a cheerleader. That's just not helpful, right? We don't need cheerleaders. It's a waste of time and money to have a coach who does that. When you work with a coach, that person is there to lovingly and truthfully help you find your blind spots and guide you through them. So that's, you know, something I've really had to learn. And then conversely, I've received some really harsh feedback and some extremely weird feedback, you know, kind of picky, really, from previous leaders, as well as really positive. So it has been a bit of a mixed bag, but as I say, I've struggled to receive positive feedback. That's something I've really worked on recently.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, it's great that you recognize, what your natural tendency is and
Mm,
you've adjusted your approach because, honestly, and I agree with you as a coach, if you weren't truthful and pointing out those blind spots that someone isn't seeing,
mm.
it's not worth the time and money for someone to work with you. I mean, you can
Yeah,
get a cheerleader out of anyone, your
yeah, get your
friends,
friends for
anyone.
that. Yeah.
This
Exactly.
and this leads me to, why feedback is so important and the way and the manner it's delivered and how it's received matters. I
Hmm.
think there are probably a dozen stories I can tell you,
Mm,
but the one experience that comes to mind when I think about a positive experience with receiving the feedback
yeah.
was a few years back. I was in a fresh role and I had some really kind of simple tasks lined up for my first week there. And like any new person starting out, I was really eager to make a killer first impression and show them, prove to them that they made the right choice by bringing me on board.
Yeah.
So this particular task was, pretty straightforward and I got through it pretty quickly. I think maybe they just needed a fresh perspective. Essentially, what they had asked me to do was to whip up a project plan for a new initiative that they really wanted to start. And I think they were just getting bogged down with unnecessary details and they decided to give it to the newbie. So here I take it. It really just took me a couple hours of work. I handed over this masterpiece, and my gosh, they were really impressed. They even spread the word about how great the job I did was. It was an instant win. I mean, it really made me feel so great that first week. That whole initial, handover, it led to a follow-up chat, a separate chat
Yeah.
from the initial conversation I had, the meeting I had where I presented this plan with them. And in that feedback chat, they praised my creativity, the speed in which I delivered, and the logic that I brought to the table in setting the project up for success. What really caught my attention was that they reassured me of their confidence in my potential and gave me their full support in my continued growth and development in that role. So
Amazing.
they didn't have to do that. They didn't have to have a separate conversation and go, they already told me what an amazing job it was the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that they made that a priority to have a separate conversation really told me something else.
Yeah, I mean that's great when you know that you did a good job and you get recognized for your efforts too. It really does give you that boost, doesn't it? And I think the
Mhm.
power in receiving feedback is knowing that, you know, one, you can take it or leave it. Like really you can. You don't have to take on someone else's perspective. It is just that. And when I learned that, you know, feedback is something that you can either take or not take, right? Massive game changer for me. I didn't know that, right? It's
Me
like, oh,
either.
I don't have to accept it. Wow, I never knew that. And so, you know, getting
Oh,
positive feedback like the experience you're talking about there is great. Like, yes, excellent, gives you that boost. But also conversely, if you don't get, you know, if it's something that doesn't resonate with you in that feedback, you don't actually have to take that on. So that's a really important
right.
point. Um, and accepting the positive review and then asking what you can improve on and how you might how that might look different, might look, is the difference between staying where you are and getting where you want to be. So obviously you got
Right.
positive feedback. Great. If you get that, you could say, great, what else could I do? What could I improve on? Where can I get to in my, to help me get further, is another
Right.
way that you can react in feedback. And
I love that.
I think that's really how I learned about how important, sorry, throughout my career, like I think the post impactful feedback has been the most impactful. Oh, sorry, I'm having a moment. It's normal to make mistakes, friends. We're going to leave
It
this.
is totally normal. We just
My
laugh it
voice
off and
isn't
keep going.
working.
Well, here's some feedback for you.
Here's the feedback. Calm down.
You gotta have a sense of humor.
Anyway, moving back. Uh, you know what, I'll actually just say this, right? Throughout my career, the most impactful feedback that I've received is that either when I've like left the company or I've gone on vacation or something, and
Mm,
people have really noticed the difference between the impact I made when I was around and the gaping hole that I left when I
oh
wasn't
my
around.
gosh.
And I think that's
That
really how I learned how important what I do or what I did in my role, how important that was to other people. And that really boosted my confidence over time. But you don't always hear it. Like, it's good that you got that
no.
feedback and you were able to then take that and use it, which it's like not everybody gets feedback like that, Cici. So that's kind of really lucky, I think that's great.
Yeah, actually, if I would think about all my time, years of working in that specific department probably was the most pleasurable working time of my career outside of, I think, what I'm currently doing. And that says a lot for
Yeah,
a 23 plus year career, right?
yeah.
It's really crazy. But, and I also think it's super sad. I mean, I have to comment on what you just said. It's really sad when organizations don't appreciate the talent they have.
Mm.
And then that talent moves on and they go, oh man, that Rachel, we really made a blunder letting her walk out the door, right? Like that's just so sad. That's why it's so important for companies to really make
Yeah.
that investment. I mean, this is a whole separate episode, I think, but you know, I think all those points I think you made are correct. Asking what you can do even better. I think that's really a fresh perspective for me even right now.
Mm,
Even when you get good feedback, always like to have that continuous growth mindset of,
mm.
okay, great. How can I make it better? How can I do better? That's how you grow and develop as a professional.
Yeah,
So
totally.
totally with you on that one.
Yeah.
All right. So this next story probably isn't as pleasant as the one I just told you, but I think this one example I'm going to share with you is the one that comes up to memory more often than any of the others.
No.
It's definitely a lesson I won't forget. And we always learn from those moments of failure or those moments where we feel like we've hit, absolute rock bottom, and this is no
Yeah,
different.
totally.
So back in
Mm,
my earlier days in HR, I was in a role much similar to an HR business partner.
mm,
And I was juggling being the support person for multiple departments in the organization. And in that role, that included counseling managers, handling the promotion process, and basically advising on HR things like compensation. So there was this one time a manager had called and they had called about an employee possibly needing a leave of absence. In retrospect, I should have slowed down, but I had rushed to get the paperwork done promptly, but I skipped some crucial steps of checking in directly with the employee.
right,
Instead, I right away sent out the leave of absence forms and I processed them as on a leave in the system. So everything happened without a thorough discussion with the manager or the employee themselves.
right.
I don't have to tell you what a big mistake that was.
Mm,
So shortly after, the employee gets a letter in the mail confirming their leave. And of course, they're blindsided. I mean, wouldn't you be if someone sent you a letter saying congratulations on your leave of absence? You're like, what? I'm still working.
mm. Yeah.
Weird.
What's happened?
So my boss at the time, this VP, she received an earful from that manager about my big blunder
Right.
and didn't hold anything back in giving me an earful. So
Mm,
when she did, really criticized my competence, name called me careless, and just questioned my judgment. It was, I would say probably, I mean, there haven't been too many that humiliating moments, but that was probably one of the most humiliating moments.
mm.
They even threatened to put this whole incident on my permanent record. I mean, shoot, I really messed up, right?
Wow. I mean, Lordy, how is about it's okay to make a mistake? You know what I mean? Like that's all you did. You made a mistake. And
Yes,
that's not a great response from a leader, but and also like what part of this are they responsible for? Like maybe they didn't give you the information clearly enough. And like
right.
what do we learn from this? We learned that maybe I didn't ask enough questions, right?
Yes,
And that person was like, maybe I didn't share enough information. It's like, like post reflect on it rather than like what's happening there is someone's got an earful, they feel bad, they've then projected that onto you so that you
right.
feel bad. And it's like at the end of the day, someone, maybe both of us, made mistakes, and that's okay.
Exactly. Yes. And that is exactly the mindset, take the time to have a civilized conversation. I mean, there's a million ways that
Mm,
conversation could have been handled. That
mm,
that whole experience, I mean, God, Rachel, I
mm,
came home feeling totally crushed,
yeah.
almost like my confidence went, into the toilet down the drain.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, it wasn't constructive feedback because there
Mm,
was no actionable advice or guidance I
yeah.
can take back with me. It was just, a severe dressing down. And that helped me to grow. But instead of that conversation helping me to grow in the way that I think it was intended to, it just made me nervous around this VP. And of
Mm,
course, that affected my performance, confidence. And of course, when layoffs hit, yours truly was in that first batch to go, right? That's how I lost my job.
mm,
But, looking back, that definitely taught me how not to give feedback.
mm,
It lacked support or guidance for improvement. And it really left a sour taste in my mouth. And that's a feeling, I have to be honest, that feeling of how I felt leaving her office. I remember that feeling. So when I give feedback, I am so conscious of how I project and the impression I'm giving the other person, still to be firm, but I am very, conscious of I don't want that person to leave this conversation going, oh, great. Well,
yeah.
that was a waste of my time.
Well, that wasn't feedback, that was a telling off.
That was, yeah, a reprimand.
Yeah,
The
you got told
principal's
off.
office.
Yeah, you got literally told off. Like it's not
Yes,
feedback.
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
interesting, isn't it? I mean, I've had some horrific feedback, which, I had to take on and also learn from some of it too. But some of it was based on personal opinion over being helpful. And I think
Mm,
there's something we need to like understand about where we kind of need to like demark what is our personal opinion, our personal biases over what is actually feedback, right? So, what I mean by that is that my experience with feedback as a child was critical, as I mentioned before. So I was quite sharp-tongued and very direct when it came to talking to people in the workplace. And I've had some very busy jobs in ad agencies where I've had to run sometimes up to 40 projects, right, at a time.
wow.
And in my head, I was like, I don't got time for small talk. I don't care what you did at the weekend or what you're wearing, right? And I literally was like, I just don't care. I don't have time for it. But, this really did work against me. I did get feedback to say, Rachel, just try and have a little bit of a conversation with people. I said, I haven't got time for that. You don't pay me to tell people how good they look in their shirt today. But like it kind of did go against me. So I learned that that wasn't good. But some feedback did get personal, and that that whole kind of 360 feedback
Oh,
process
sure.
modeling was quite often used in a retaliatory manner instead of what it's meant for, which is to give well-rounded feedback points to people. um I've also had some narcissistic managers who were more interested in making themselves look good. And so it
Uh,
became, in order for me to then kind of get around that, it becomes a game of manipulation and trying to work the system, which just isn't great. Like it's just toxic. Um, I've
totally.
these ones are a couple of good ones actually. I once got pulled into a meeting, right? Wait for it, for rolling my eyes by the managing director.
God.
And another time for snapping at someone, right? Snapping at someone. And it's like, hello, I'm a human being, right? But like interestingly, as I was going into that meeting where I was going to be reprimanded for snapping at someone actually snapped at me as I walked into that
Oh
meeting.
God.
Right? Talk about the irony of that.
Yeah.
And I was apoplectic at this situation because of the unfairness of it. It's like, wait a minute, how can I get reprimanded for something that someone just did to me and you don't
Right.
do to them? Like, that's just not
Right.
fair. I hate unfairness of that kind of thing. So, anyway, it's just
Oh,
picky and pathetic and petty. And you know what? Like, I ended up leaving that place anyway. But yeah, I've worked at some pretty toxic workplaces, the names of which will never be mentioned.
of course. But of course, when you do something like that, it's a big problem for everyone. But when
Yeah.
someone else does it, it's never a problem.
No.
Those kinds of environments, those who shall remain nameless,
Yeah.
I definitely have lost a star in my eyes.
Hmm.
But I do also agree with you. You made a point earlier about sometimes feedback
Mm.
being tainted by biased in someone's opinion. I think
Yeah.
in the last example I shared, there was a particular coworker on that team who had the VP's ear,
Right.
and that coworker wasn't particularly fond of me for whatever that reason was.
Hmm.
So I think for me, that was a lose-lose situation. But
Yeah.
that's why I think feedback, the way it's delivered, is so important, because if it's done correctly, it can do a couple of things for you, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, giving feedback clarifies the expectation, which you
Hmm.
need so you can do
Hmm.
your job well,
Yeah.
right? It also enhances your own skills and your knowledge, which obviously is another thing that you need to
Hmm.
grow and develop in your career.
Yeah.
But it also can boost motivation, just like in the example I shared at the
Mm.
beginning, where I shared I got some feedback about what I did really well. That
Mm.
actually did motivate me to
Mm.
keep doing better and better
Yeah.
intrinsically.
Yeah.
And obviously, by improving your performance, you build awareness of what you're doing well, and also encourages, accountability to look at what you can build on or what you can strengthen. And obviously, for the organization, it'll drive success, right? So there are so many reasons why feedback is important, but also delivering it correctly can make the difference because of all these things.
Yeah. I mean, I really do believe that giving feedback is a skill. And, it baked into it needs to be, an element of empathy, coaching, mentoring skills, as well as those deep listening skills. And
Mhm.
receiving feedback well is also something you can learn because it's easy to take things personally, as we know, like, depending also on who's giving it. But knowing when
Sure.
it's helpful feedback or feedback that's loaded with, personal opinion is also helpful, like understanding who's giving it, how they're giving it, and what it's really about. Because
Right.
feedback should have an element of growth in it. So even if there isn't great feedback or is like, you've done something wrong or something didn't go well, it's not really about you've done something wrong. It's about the situation didn't pan out the way it should. So how can we then create something better?
Right.
So when you get positive feedback, look for where you can improve and ask that question. And when you get negative feedback, look for what went well and then focus how you can improve without taking it on as there being something wrong with you.
Right, right. And man, I wish this was a conversation I listened to earlier in my career,
Yeah.
because these are the things that people don't tell you when
No.
you enter the workforce or when you're
Yeah.
in your 20s starting out. That's why
Mm.
we're talking about feedback in this way and really educating people on the mindset around feedback.
Mm.
We're not taught these things, so it's really important that we do so that when we're in those critical moments, we are armed with this knowledge and awareness.
Yeah.
And I read this poll recently. I think it was by the Gallup group.
Right.
And they reported that 14.5% of managers strongly agree that they are effective at giving feedback,
Mm.
while over 50% say they feel some confidence in their ability to do that. I mean, what?
Mm.
Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me. I mean, even those people who strongly agree that they're effective at giving feedback, are they? You know,
Right. I would
like-
question that too.
yeah. But and you
Really?
know, I don't, as you mentioned before, I don't think we set people up to give and receive feedback well. It's kind of assumed that we know how to do it, which is why leadership programs and any internal staff training does need to include this for their employees, because you know, receiving feedback all comes to how you see yourself and feel about yourself, your beliefs, your values, what's important to you. And, you know, if you're not confident in yourself and don't fundamentally believe at your core in your ability or hold fears about who you are, then receiving feedback can be hard. And
Mhm.
that's really where coaching helped me, and it can help anyone listening too.
Exactly. It's definitely a part of the curriculum for the programs I run in my organization.
There
And
you
if it isn't
go.
already included in leadership programs where you are, it really should be.
Yeah.
All right. So we've spent some time here sharing our experiences with feedback and talked a little bit about what good feedback looks like and what it doesn't. If you Google feedback, you'll obviously get a very long list of do's and don'ts and all types of frameworks and strategies. And for those of you listening, you might be thinking about a feedback conversation you need to have with someone. So
Mm.
here are a few strategies for you. The first thing is you should really prepare for that conversation and have your points ready, making sure it is specific and objective.
Mm.
You know, make sure you're having this conversation timely, reflect on what you're there to discuss so you can state it clearly and use examples. It also helps to use I statements to express your perspective. The second thing here is try to open that conversation in a positive way. Either something in their behavior, maybe a recent win, you can totally use your judgment there, but on a high note. The third, this has to be a two-way conversation. It's not
Mhm.
meant to be a lecture. You're not there for, to just give them your perspective and send them off packing. You're there as a partner,
Mm.
really invest in that time and invest in them and show them you really care. And fourth, it's really important to also close out on a high note because you have to balance that feedback. Feedback, the conversation could get awkward and uncomfortable, so especially if you're talking about an area where someone has to improve, balancing that with some positivity at the end will go a long way. And also that also includes following up with the person after the conversation to show that you truly support them and their growth. Empathy is really key here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally agree with, like, you know, recapping at the end of the conversation and following up just to say, you know, are we in agreement here? Like checking that people
Mhm.
understand, you know. And lastly, you know, focus on what the feedback can give you from a growth perspective, and try and view it with with that lens, you know, like what can I get out of it instead of focusing on what's wrong with me. You know,
Right.
we need to learn to bounce forward with feedback and use it as a springboard, even when it can feel negative, because there's always something that you can learn from this to propel you to the next level in your career or life. So try and, you know, focus on that rather than, oh my God, what's wrong with me? And then getting angry about it and, you know, all of the feelings that we feel.
Yes, definitely want to avoid all those.
Mm.
So, wherever you are in your career journey, our hope is that you can take away these insights from today's episode. Really prep for that conversation in every way. Be specific about what you are observing. And when you're suggesting how they can improve, be clear and specific about the actions you're recommending that they take.
Yeah. And remember, feedback is information that you can use. And if it doesn't feel right, you don't have to take it on. You can literally say, thank you for your perspective, and leave it behind you. Game changer for me.
A- Amen to that. I wish I had that tip handy for some of my feedback conversations.
Totally.
With that, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. If we can leave you with a thought, how are you going to approach giving or receiving feedback next time? If you liked this episode, we would be so grateful if you could share it with your friends and tag us on social media at Leading Ladies Who Lunch. Your reviews of this podcast mean so much to us. We'd love it if you could rate it and subscribe to the show.
Remember, you can find us and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcast platforms. So subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes and follow us on Instagram at Leading Ladies Who Lunch.
Stay tuned for another great episode in 2 weeks.
Until then, stay sassy. Thank you for joining us on the empowering journey at the Leading Ladies Who Lunch podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our insightful discussions, actionable strategies, and inspiring stories that we break down during each episode. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Leading Ladies Who Lunch on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And remember, the conversations you've heard on this podcast are just the beginning of your journey. Let your voice be heard, inspire change, and continue breaking barriers as you lead with authenticity, resilience, and unwavering determination.
Until next time, keep embracing your leadership potential, challenging the norms, and shaping a better world for women in the workplace. Leading Ladies Who Lunch, empowering women, changing lives.